Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. All right, man. So you guys know we got the Grand Swiss rolling, and so I do have the game for you between Alireza Firouzja and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. So it is now, as of a while back, you know that Alireza Firouzja did move from Iran to France. He's actually been living in France for a while now, so it is technically an all-France matchup. So, yes, for all of my people that are in the Philippines, as always, I got to address my Philippines people. I will say mabuhay to you. Kamusta na aking makaibigan. Maraming salamat po sa nanonood ng aking my video. I appreciate you guys very much. Magandang umaga. Thank you very much for stopping by. Anybody who is coming from France, of course, I will say bonjour to you. Bon après-midi. If you are eating breakfast, bon petit déjeuner. Ça me fait plaisir de te voir, mes amis. Comment ça va? Comment allez-vous? Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. Anybody who is coming from Iran or who does speak Farsi or Persian, I will say salam to you and khayli mamnoon. Appreciate you guys very much. Merci as well for stopping by and taking a look at my video. But if you guys are ready to go, this is the round 5 game. Let's hit it. So we open with e4. We have c5. So we have the ever famous Sicilian defense. We do have knight to f3. We got d6. And I always am telling you guys, when you guys do play against the Sicilian, this is going to be probably 80% of the time that you're going to actually see this exact variation played. And you get into all different kinds of stuff. I mean, you can get into some dragons. You know, you can get into some Najdorfs. Those are going to be by far the most famous ones of all, but many options. We do see d4, pawn takes d4, knight takes d4, knight to f6. We see knight to c3, and we do see the Najdorf with a6. This is going to be by far, other than the dragon, this is going to be by far the most famous of the Sicilian defenses. Everybody pretty much ever has played the Sicilian Najdorf. We do have a4. Now, this is a very severe sideline. And so it's not the absolute best move. It does still keep, a nice position for white. But one of the main ideas behind a4 is just stopping a b5. As you guys know, of course, b5 can't be played right now. And it really discourages it a lot because you have so many things protecting this square that it almost makes b5 impossible. This is one of the very desirable moves that black wants to try to play in a Sicilian, just to go on an attack on this side of the board. So we do have e5. Knight does come back to f3. Now, one of the things that you have to make sure that you're paying attention to when you are playing the Sicilian as black, e5 is generally a weakening move because it does prevent, a lot of the times it does prevent your d6 pawn from being able to push forward. And you will see white is playing against that. So be very careful when you commit that pawn forward. We do see bishop to e7. We see bishop to g5. Bishop comes to e6. We see bishop takes f6. Bishop takes f6. And like I just mentioned before, and I'll mention a little bit later, the huge fight for white is to try to control this square as much as possible. I'll get into a little bit more detail as to why that is a little bit later on, once we kind of see some things, transpire. But, that is what white and black primary focus is. We do see knight up to d5. Knight comes to d7. Bishop goes to c4. Rook comes over to c8. And then we do see b3. Just solidifying this bishop. Knight to b6 does try to attack that bishop, and do a little bit of damage on this structure. So something kind of has to give in this position. So we actually see knight takes f6 with check. Queen takes f6. Bishop takes e6. And then we do see queen taking e6. And we see castles by white. Castle comes by black, and then we have c4. And I mentioned before that both players are trying to do a lot to focus on trying to control d5. The reason why black wants to try to control d5 is because it really, really wants to push this pawn. This is pretty much the only weakness in black's position. And so it is really kind of a target for white right now. So they really want to kind of try to get rid of it without just giving it completely away. So it does want to try to, influence this d5 square to try to push that pawn and basically get rid of their only weakness. Now, from the whites' perspective, what they are trying to do is they are basically trying to make it impossible to push this pawn. So as you guys remember from backing up, all of the play is centered around, controlling this square, and bishop to e6 comes because you don't want bishop to c4 to be played because then it just supports a piece on d5 without having to cover it like this, because you do want to keep this as a weakness. So like I said, you saw all of this play, centered around influencing this d5 square all the way till we get to this point, and then we do have c4. And as you can see, with these two pawns having a complete grip on the square, it is now impossible to push this pawn. So this, not specific to the Sicilian, but in these types of situations where you do have your opponent that has a, weak pawn, a backward pawn, you do want to try to control the square in front of that pawn as much as possible so that at some point you might be able to pick it off. So we do see knight to d2, and this is the novelty of the game. We see knight down to c5. We see rook over to e1, just making sure that we, support our pawn as much as possible. This pawn is actually pretty important because, like I said, this pawn with this pawn is holding this d5 square. We do see f5, and f5, it still goes with the theme of black. You're trying as much as possible to undermine the, the wall that is on d5, and f5 is a perfect move to play to try to undermine that as much as possible. So pawn takes f5, queen takes f5, and then we do have f3. And f3 is just trying to keep this knight out of this square because this was actually a nice square for it to try to come to. So it just prevents that. It also tries to prevent this push of this pawn. Black is trying to get their weakness gone. Knight does come to d3. We see rook over to f1. We see rook f to d8. And then we have actually reached a point in the game that if you do want to pause the video, and there is a really, really nice multi-purpose move to be played right now that Alireza Firouzja does play. Go ahead and pause the video and see if you can find this move. Okay, cool. So like I said, the main weakness in black's position is this d6 pawn. But something else that you might notice about the position is that there is a way to actually disconnect the protection of this knight from the queen. And so if you guessed the move knight to e4, you will have found this move. This is a really, really beautiful move. Not only is it putting pressure on this d6 point, it has now just disconnected the protection of this knight from this queen. And that is, it's not like a crazy deep tactic, but it is a very nice tactic to be looking out for, when you are playing your games. If there is a way for you to disconnect the protection of a piece from another piece by putting something in the way, or maybe sacrificing a piece and creating, forcing a pawn to kind of go in the way type situation, it can get kind of complicated. But as you guys can see, just, visually here, this knight is now completely undefended. So something has to be done about this. So Maxime Vachier-Lagrave does play knight to f4, which is the most logical place for it to go. And then we do see rook up to e2. We are rook up to a2. We are preparing to move this rook over. So before white has a chance to do that, black is able to finally get rid of their only weakness with some tempo. We do see d5. Pawn takes d5, rook takes d5, and then we see rook over to d2. Rook c comes over to d8, trying to, put as much pressure on white as possible. Rook takes d5, rook takes d5, and then we do see queen over to c2. You do have to be careful about this, though, because you are undefending. This queen is undefended over here on c2. So you kind of want to be careful. Like I said, you can't really move the knight anywhere that protects the queen. So this is a slightly, it's a good move, but it is a slightly risky thing to be doing. So don't get in the habit of doing that. The queen does step back to d7. We do see rook over to c1. We see h6. You always want to make sure that you have a luft for your king. You never want to have a situation where you get back rank mated. Queen goes to c8 with check. King side steps over to h7. We see queen taking d7, rook taking d7. And then we do see king to f1. And as interesting as it does sound, the players actually agreed to a draw in this position. I believe that Maxime Vachier-Lagrave was the one that offered the draw, and Firouzja did accept. And so this does keep him in the lead during the tournament. So he is, I believe, 4 games out of 5 right now. Just to kind of give you guys like an idea of what might possibly continue in this game. You know, you would probably see rook to d3. You know, the rook would step over to b1 just to protect that pawn. You'd see b6, h4, king going over to g6, a5, just weakening the pawns that you have, doubling your opponent's pawn. So you're going to be getting the pawn back. Pawn takes a5, king comes up to f2, king goes over to h5. We got g3 knocking the knight. Knight goes to e6, we see rook to a1. Knight comes down to d4, we see rook taking a5. You know, we are going to try to undermine this knight. So the rook does take on b3, rook takes e5 with check. And I mean, you can see that everything's fairly equal. You just have to be careful because this pawn can get pretty fast, pretty quick. Another possibility after we did see a rook down to d3 is just trying to go into an immediate trade. It's all pretty much equals out to around the same thing. I mean, rook coming down to check on d1, king up to f2, and then we have rook over to b1. And instead, you just kind of come behind the pawn and you're just trying to attack it that way. So, I mean, all of this is dead even. So, I mean, they were very accurate in their assessment of the position being very drawn. So, you know, both of them being the level that they are, they just said, hey, man, let's go ahead and just get the draw now. Because they probably would have ended up just playing another, you know, 20, 30 moves and it would have been a draw anyway. So, yes, that is that game. And for those of you that are wondering, I'm wearing my Astros gear, man, because the Astros are in the World Series right now. They are down 3-1. But, I mean, you know, you never know. I mean, there have been some comeback situations in the past. It's not impossible. So, I'm trying to support my Astros, man. I'm an Astros and Rockets fan, as you guys know, that have been around for a minute. But I appreciate everybody very much for stopping by. Maraming salamat aking makaibigan. Merci beaucoup, mon ami. Khayli mamnoon, everybody. And I will see everybody next time.